of Good 360. Second, I would like to present both of our guests today with our traditional National Press Club coffee mugs.
A look at the U.S. Capitol with the flags at half-staff to mark the passing of New Jersey Senator Frank Lautenberg, who died earlier today at the age of 89. The Senate about to gavel in to start their day and their week. General speeches, the first order of business, for about 2 hours or so. At roughly 4 o'clock Eastern Time, lawmakers will return to the Farm Bill. 2 amendments to that bill are expected to be voted on around 5:30 this afternoon. Watching live coverage from the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will now lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. O God, thank you for being near to us in good and bad times. We celebrate your wonderful blessings that bring us new victories each day. As we look at the flowers on the desk of our friend and brother, Senator Frank Lautenberg, we thank you for his life and legacy. As we mourn his death, send your comfort into our hearts. Bless Bonnie and his family and give them your peace. Let our memory of this good and courageous American inspire us to transcend the barriers that divide us and to work for the good of America. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 3, 2013. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tim Kaine, a senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President Pro Tempore.
Majority Leader.
I ask the Senate observe now a moment of silence in honor of Frank R. Lautenberg, late a senator from the state of New Jersey.
The Senate will now observe a moment of silence. If all could please stand.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I have a few matters I must take care of. We'll be in a period of morning business until 4 p.m. today. Following that morning business, Senate will resume consideration of the Farm Bill. At 5:30, there will be 2 roll call votes on amendments to that bill. There are 2 bills just due for a second reading.
Clerk will read the titles of the bills for a second time.
H.R. 3, an act to approve the construction, operation, and maintenance of the Keystone XL pipeline and for other purposes. H.R. 271, an act to clarify that compliance with an emergency order under Section 202C of the Federal Power Act and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I object to both further proceedings with regard to both of these matters.
Objection having been heard, the measures will now be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, when I learned early this morning that Frank Lautenberg had died, of course, I became immediately very, very sad. I've served with him for 2.5 decades or more here in the Senate, and to see now the flowers on his desk. It seems the flowers have barely wilted on the desk that was right behind me, center in a way. So I, Mr. President, have a heavy heart. The senior senator from New Jersey and my friend, Frank Lautenberg, died this morning, as we all know. My thoughts are with his lovely old wife, Bonnie, his children, and 13 grandchildren. Few people in the history of this institution have contributed as much to our nation and to the United States Senate as Frank Lautenberg. His success story is really what the American dream is all about. He came from a family of working-class immigrants from Eastern Europe, Russia and Poland. His parents struggled, and I've heard Frank talk about how they struggled. They worked so hard. They moved around New Jersey often. When Frank was 18, during the middle of World War II, he enlisted in the United States Army. During World War II, he served in the Signal Corps, and I can remember Frank talking about his experiences in the European theater. Once as I said, he was on the Army Signal Corps. He's up on a power line, a wooden power pole, and he can see the war going on in his sight. During World War II, he talked about the many experiences he had, as he said, making him a better American. He was very proud of this military service. He is the last World War II veteran having served in the Senate. We don't have any World War II veterans anymore, Mr. President. His death is a great loss for this institution in many, many different ways. When Frank came home from the war, he was obviously very smart and was permitted to attend the very prestigious Columbia University. He did it, of course, on the GI Bill, like millions of other returning Americans did. But he quickly found his own business, his own company. He did it with 2 boyhood friends, all 3 of them from New Jersey, 3 kids from New Jersey. Under his leadership, this firm, Automatic Data Processing, known as ADP, grew into the largest computing service company of its kind in the world. He was so very, very proud of that company. And he never hesitated to tell everyone that he made money. He became rich. He was a poor boy who became wealthy as a result of people being able to fulfill their dreams as people can do in America. Frank wasn't content with his personal success alone. He was proud of a lot of the civic and charitable things he did, but nothing made him more proud of what he did outside government than when he served as the head of the United Jewish Appeal, known as the Jewish Federations of North America. He was very proud of that. Mr. President, Frank Lautenberg was known for many, many things before he came to the Senate, but he ran an impossible race for the Senate and was elected. In 1982, he came to the Congress the same year that I did. And in the 3 decades since, he's worked tirelessly on behalf of his state and the country. He retired once. He couldn't stand retirement. He hated retirement. He couldn't stay away from public service, and he returned to the Senate again in 2002. He had a remarkable career. I've just touched upon a few of the things. His determination that made him successful in the private sector also served him well in the United States Senate. Mr. President, motivated by his own experience, Senator Lautenberg, a World War II veteran, co-wrote the 21st Century GI Bill of Rights, recognizing he did how much this meant to him. And he wanted to help ensure that veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan enjoyed the same opportunities for education that helped him become so successful. And, Mr. President, my youngest boy just hated cigarette smoke. And it really made him ill. And airplanes, remember we went through a procedure there where you could smoke every place in the airplane and finally only part of the airplane, but it didn't matter. Everybody sucked in that secondhand smoke. Frank Lautenberg took care of my boy and millions of other people that would no longer have to suck in that smoke when they're in an airplane. He is the one, more than anyone else, that we have to thank for protecting us from deadly secondhand smoke in an airplane because his legislation banned smoking on airplanes. He also was a longtime member of the Environment and Public Works Committee. Had he not retired for that very short period of time that he did, he would have been chairman of that committee. Because he wasn't there, I got the opportunity to be chair of that committee, actually on 2 separate occasions. So he focused on this nation's infrastructure, roads and highways. And one of the things he thought that would make this country a much safer place is to pass a drinking limit. That is, you couldn't drink alcohol any place in the country until you're 21 years of age, and that's what he did. A national drunk driving standard is what it was called. He believed in helping the state of New Jersey. That was his first priority. And his second priority was helping the country. And I'm not sure which order they came. It was hard to understand the difference between Frank Lautenberg because he was focused on the country and New Jersey at the same time. Frank wanted to make sure women and children were protected from gun violence. And because of him, we passed legislation here that convicted domestic abusers couldn't own firearms. So just a few examples of his work here in the Senate that literally saved lives. And, Mr. President, he came out of his sickbed in a wheelchair to vote on gun legislation. He agreed with 90% of the American people, the people who had severe mental problems or were felons shouldn't be able to buy a gun. He agreed with 90% of the American people, and he came from his bed to come here and vote with us. He was so happy to be here. He came once after that, just a few days ago, to vote when we needed him again. He tried so hard. Talking to Bonnie today, she said he was confident he'd live to be 100. He was a very strong man physically. April, a couple of years ago, I took a big delegation to China, bipartisan group. It was a wonderful trip. Frank Lautenberg, that was his last foreign travel. And I can remember indicating what a strong man he was physically. I hadn't been to the Great Wall of China. I don't know how many of the other 10 senators had been, but I hadn't been. And it's pretty steep and big rocks there that's been there for those centuries and centuries. And there were, because Frank was 88 years old at the time, somebody grabbed his arm to help him go up. He pushed them away. He wanted no help from anybody. He was on his own. That's the way he wanted to be. Our nation, owes a great debt of gratitude for Frank for his outstanding service. He has always been so kind to me. He was one that really appreciated his service. He appreciated being here. He loved being in the Senate. And the nation's going to miss his strength and his progressive leadership. Mr. President, the other thing that probably a lot of people don't know about Frank Lautenberg his sense of humor. I had him tell the story because no one could tell the story like him. But another reason I kind of like Frank is he laughed at his own jokes. He thought they were funny, as most everyone listening to them did. One of our favorites was about two wrestlers. There was a pretzel move that it would take him about 5 minutes or more to tell the story, but it was hilarious. No one could tell it like Frank. So he had a sense of humor, and we certainly appreciated that. Even though the United States Senate, Mr. President, at midnight last night had Al Franken, and we still have Al Franken, but there was room for two funny people prior to Frank's death this morning. Frank and Frank Lautenberg, Al Franken, always made us smile and often made us laugh. Now, I guess it's going to be up to Senator Franken to do this alone, because they were both really, really funny together and apart. So it's with deep sadness that his Senate's family is going to say goodbye. We're going to do that Wednesday morning. Say goodbye to an exemplary public servant, a faithful friend, Senator Frank Lautenberg. Note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Say aye.
In a quorum call here on the Senate floor, the Senate gavelled in, started their day and their week coming off of the Memorial Day break. General speech is the first order of business for the next hour and a half or so. Roughly 4 o'clock Eastern Time, lawmakers are going to return to the Farm Bill and 2 amendments to that bill that are expected to be voted on around 5:30 Eastern Time this afternoon.
We heard a short time ago Majority Leader Harry Reid talking about Senator Frank Lautenberg, giving a tribute to his career in the Senate. Senator Lautenberg died this morning at the age of 89. He served from 1982 to 2001, and then again from 2003 to this morning, the time of his death. Wanted to read a couple of statements, part of statements that were sent out by members of Congress today. Senator Menendez saying, Frank Lautenberg loved his job and the people who elected him 5 times, who trusted him to always be on their side, and he always was. Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi from the House saying today, our country mourns the loss of Senator Lautenberg, a man whose life embodied the American dream, who dedicated his career to putting that dream in reach for all Americans. And then Majority Leader Reid, who we heard earlier on the floor, saying, I am deeply saddened at the loss of my friend Frank Lautenberg. I can think of no better example of an American success story than Frank's life. The pending business here in the Senate is the Farm Bill, and right now we're going to take a look ahead at what's happening in Congress this week.
Yeah. But let's begin with Congress returning this week, and the headline from thehill.com, some court challenges could tear down major pieces of Obamacare. The piece by Sam Baker points out that the president's health care law is under attack in the courts, even as the administration sprints toward its full implementation. Bob Cusack is the managing editor of the Hill newspaper, joining us live on the phone. Good morning. Thanks very much for being with us.
Good morning, Steve.
A busy week. Let's begin, though, with this headline from your colleague Sam Baker. What's this all about?
Well, these are basically makes the case that legal challenges to Obamacare are not finished, and there are really a handful of lawsuits, some in the pipeline that are closer to getting to the higher courts than others. But they focus on the IRS setting up insurance programs, which is kind of a concern even for supporters of Obamacare, that if that ever got to the Supreme Court, that could be struck down. Obviously, the IRS has been in the news recently. And then there's another lawsuit on the birth control provisions. And then a couple other issues that are in the pipeline, but probably those are court battles that are beyond those two. They're going to take probably more than a year to get to. But the legal challenges of Obamacare are still ongoing.
And there's one point from this story which also gets to what Congress is going to be focusing on this week with regard to the IRS, pointing out that one lawsuit accusing the IRS of illegally implementing these new subsidies to help people buy insurance. And, of course, as you and others are pointing out, 2 new days of hearings on the IRS this week.
Yeah, that's right. Danny Werfel, the acting IRS commissioner, will be testifying before the House Appropriations Committee just tomorrow. And then that's just the beginning of the hearings. The Ways and Means Committee in the House will be hearing from conservative groups and their experience of being targeted by the IRS. And then later in the week, we have Darrell Iss's Oversight Committee will be highlighting a new audit, more trouble for the IRS, about conference spending by the agency that Danny Werfel, the IRS acting commissioner, has already said was inappropriate. So we'll be getting more details on how much spending, how much wasteful spending was spent on these conferences later this week. But clearly, one of the focus this week will be on the IRS.
In fact, Danny Werfel called that part of the legacy from a previous era, putting blame in part on the Bush administration.
Yes, yes. So this, I mean, it goes back a long time, and that's Werfel's message that there's a lot to be done at the IRS. There's a lot of reforms that have to be implemented that are just not tied to Obama administration tenure.
Another story from your colleague Jennifer Martinez with the headline, lawmakers press the president to get tough on China with regard to hacking. And again, this story available online at thehill.com. And one key player in this is Congressman Mike Rogers of Michigan, who's calling on the president to explicitly warn the Chinese president that cyber attacks waged by his country's government and military will not be tolerated by the U.S. And these comments from over the weekend of Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, Bob Cusack, who was in Singapore, again accusing China of cyber espionage, drawing some sharp responses from the Chinese government.
Yes, I mean, this could be a really bit of an awkward meeting between a president and a Chinese leader because clearly the U.S. government believes it has enough proof that over the years that the Chinese government has been involved in these hacking incidents. So the fact that they might be setting up some type of new memorandum or some type of new process where certain things are not allowed formally is an indication that there could be progress. But this is going to be an awkward meeting because the Chinese government has denied what the U.S. is alleging.
Some other things to look for this week. First of all, July 1st is the deadline before student loan rates increase. We heard from the president on Friday at the White House. Congress is under the gun to do something, correct?
Absolutely, and this sounds familiar. It is, because about a year ago, Democrats in Congress and President Obama challenged Republicans to keep the rates at 3.4%, and Republicans didn't like the Democratic remedy, but under political pressure, they caved. Now, Republicans are saying, we're not going to cave this year. They want to tie the rates not to an artificial number like 3.4%. They have passed legislation in the House, mostly along party lines, that would tie it more to market rates. That has drawn a White House veto, and Senate Democrats are working on their own bill that they hope to get to this week that would freeze the rate at 3.4% for 2 years. They say the House version would simply raise rates, and that's what Democrats, they say they don't want to do that, and they say they're going to stand strong. So, you know, between now and July 1st, there's going to be a lot of jockeying on that.
We're talking with Bob Cusack, who is the managing editor of the Hill newspaper. A couple of other agenda items before we let you go. First of all, the Farm Bill. Where does that stand in the Senate and also work in the House?
Well, in the Farm Bill, a bipartisan bill, that's going to be the first thing that the Senate addresses this week. They started before the last recess. They're going to be working through various amendments. That is a bipartisan bill. That is expected to pass the Senate. Now, it passed the Senate last year, but didn't got out of committee in the House, but not on the floor. Now, if you talk to House members who are pushing the Farm Bill, they are optimistic that they're going to get a floor vote, and House leadership has indicated there will be a floor vote. And a lot of the controversy between the Senate version and the House version goes to what's called SNAP, and those are food stamp programs and the allotment for funding in those bills. Very different, and conservatives really want to ratchet that number down. So there's more hope that a farm bill could be signed into law this year, or perhaps into early next year.
The previous order, the leadership time is reserved, and under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 4 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you'll let me know when 10 minutes occurs, I would appreciate it. And
Chair will so notify.
No other senators on the floor. I'll continue. I'm here today, Mr. President, to speak on clean energy independence. But before I do that, I want to note the passing of Senator Frank Lautenberg. When I came to the Senate 10 years ago, there were a number of members here who were veterans of World War II. Now there are none. Senator Lautenberg was the last. A member of the generation often described as the greatest. He's the son of immigrants. He made a lot of money in business as an entrepreneur in the American dream. Then he did another entrepreneurial thing. He ran for the United States Senate and served twice here. He was an avid advocate for the things he believed in, and he was a productive senator. Just in the last couple of weeks, he had helped to fashion an agreement on toxic waste chemicals, of which I'm a co-sponsor. It's been a long time coming, and he had a major role in that. So we'll miss him, and to his wife Bonnie and to his family, they have my respect and condolences and admiration for his long service to our country. Mr. President, 5 years ago, I spoke at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I began with a story from our past about our future. It's a familiar story to those of us in Tennessee. President Franklin Roosevelt called the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee into his office in 1942. He said, "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask you to hide a couple of $1 billion in the budget for a secret project to win the war." And Senator McKellar said, "That should be no problem, Mr. President. I just have one question. Where in Tennessee will it be?" And that became Oak Ridge. That was how Tennessee became one of the sites where scientists worked to build the bomb before the Germans did, so that we wouldn't be held hostage to the Germans. I suggested 5 years ago that we have a new Manhattan Project, really many Manhattan projects for clean energy independence. And last week in Oak Ridge, 5 years after that first speech, I suggested 4 grand principles to help us chart a competitive energy future for the next 5 years, to end our obsession with taxpayer subsidies and strategies for expensive energy, and instead focus on doubling government-sponsored research and allowing marketplace solutions to create an abundance of cheap, clean, reliable energy. I'd like to renew those comments today on the floor of the United States Senate. The 4 grand principles I mentioned were cheaper, not more expensive energy; 2, clean, not just renewable energy; 3, research and development, not government mandates; and 4, free market, not the government picking winners and losers. The 7 grand challenges I suggested 5 years ago were grounded in challenges from the United States National Academy of Engineering. The challenges included plug-in electric vehicles, finding ways to capture and use carbon from coal plants, helping solar become cost competitive, safely managing nuclear waste, encouraging cellulosic biofuels, making new buildings green buildings, creating energy from fusion. My goal in laying out those 7 challenges was clean energy independence. At the time, some took issue with the idea of a grand goal underlying these challenges, but I thought independence was a good goal then, and it's a good goal now, because the United States should not be held hostage by any other country because of our energy needs. Since I spoke 5 years ago, the Department of Energy has established the Energy Innovation Hubs that are producing fuels from sunlight and advancing nuclear reactor and battery technologies. That, paired with the work of the new Energy Research Agency, which we call ARPA-E, and others, has moved us forward on the 7 grand challenges in a number of ways. Let me summarize that briefly. Electric vehicles are approaching 100,000 in the United States, and ARPA-E has helped a company that has doubled the energy density of lithium-ion batteries. Carbon capture. We're developing commercial uses for carbon dioxide, like liquid fuels produced from microbes, solar power. The goal is around $1 per watt installed by 2020, and the cost has fallen from $8 to $4. Still has a long way to go, but it's promising. Nuclear waste. 4 of us in the Senate have drafted comprehensive nuclear waste legislation. For the first time in 30 years, we're building new large reactors, and we're moving forward on small modular nuclear reactors. Advanced biofuels. There are 3 new bioenergy research centers. Green buildings. Research and development has meant 20 new commercial projects in energy efficiency. Fusion. We've already demonstrated human-engineered fusion on a small scale, and now we're trying to scale it up for commercial energy production. The U.S. has made gains, but we still have challenges. Even as other parts of the world grow rapidly, the Energy Information Administration estimates that our country will continue to use about 20% of all the world's energy for about 5% of the world's people. Second, we have record oil and gas production at home, but we need to be as independent as possible from those who might want to use our demand for oil to hold us hostage. Former Secretary Condoleezza Rice once said she had, quote, never seen anything warp diplomacy like high oil prices, unquote. And affording a tank of gasoline remains a struggle for many families. Another challenge is failing to keep up with energy research and development, which is one of the major points I want to make today. Failing to keep up with energy R&D. That energy research has given us abundant, reliable, cheap energy, from unconventional gas to nuclear power. The amount we spend on energy research and development, nearly $5 billion a year, at the Department of Energy in non-defense, non-cleanup money, nearly $9 billion if you count other agencies and their energy-related research, such as the National Science Foundation, the Department of Interior, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Still, those dollars are lower as a percentage of our gross product than major competitors like France or Japan or Korea or China. And another challenge is that while the United States has made more gains in reducing the use of carbon than any other industrial country, the national academies of the United States and 12 other countries have warned that human activity has contributed significantly to climate change and global warming. So thinking about the progress we've made from 5 years ago and taking into account the challenges we still have, let me suggest 4 grand principles that could guide our energy future. First, cheaper, not more expensive energy. 5 years ago, Mr. President, all the talk was about a cap-and-trade program for the United States and deliberately raising the price of energy as a way of achieving clean energy independence. Last year, I was in Germany, a country that adopted exactly that policy. In addition, Germany is closing its nuclear power plants and becoming more dependent on natural gas, but buying both forms of energy from other countries rather than producing it on its own. The Germans are subsidizing wind and solar, but are building new coal plants in order to have enough reliable electricity. What I found in Germany, in short, was an energy policy mess that discourages job growth. The end result is that Germany has the second highest household electricity prices in the European Union. When I asked an economic minister what he would say to a manufacturer about energy costs in Germany, he said, I would suggest he go somewhere else. Well, that somewhere else is turning out to be the United States, Virginia, Tennessee, other states. We pursued a different track, the most conspicuous example of which is finding unconventional gas and oil. This has created for our country a remarkable phenomenon, a large amount of cheap, clean energy with our own domestic price for natural gas. Now, this has been the result of a peculiar combination of factors that, in my opinion, amount to a better energy policy than most people give us credit for. The first element is the entrepreneurial spirit of America and a large amount of private property ownership and our huge private market. Another is access to capital, and a third and indispensable element is government-sponsored research. Take our nation's natural gas boom as an example. In the past, it was uneconomical to develop so-called unconventional gas. Government-sponsored research enabled it and demonstrated how it could be done, and a temporary federal tax credit that expired for new shale projects at the end of 1992 encouraged new sources of private capital. Now, natural gas will be a big part of where we get our clean energy, which leads me to my second principle. Clean, not just renewable energy. Too often we define our energy goals in terms of renewable energy when we should mean clean energy. There are a number of states that have a renewable energy mandate defined to include only wind and solar power. The U.S. Congress is regularly asked to pass a narrowly defined renewable energy mandate for the same purpose. It is true these energy sources emit no air pollution, and these mandates say that a certain amount of electricity generated within a state must come from these specific sources. But focusing on this narrow definition for clean energy misses the point, and at a high cost to our electric bills. Such narrow definitions also discount hydropower and nuclear power, our country's cheapest and most available sources of air pollution-free electricity. In the Tennessee Valley Authority region, where I live, for example, more than 95% of our pollution-free electricity comes from TVA's dams and 3 nuclear plants, which include 6 reactors. Second, mandating renewable energy runs the risk of creating too much reliance on sources that generate power only intermittently. There's certainly a place for these renewable technologies, and solar power especially seems to me to have great promise. But renewable energy consumes great amounts of space, whether it's solar or wind or biomass. For example, it would take a row of giant wind turbines all the way from Georgia to Maine on the Appalachian Trail to generate the same amount of electricity that we would get from 4 nuclear power plants. And you'd still need the nuclear plants because the wind only blows when it wants to. Fortunately, we have plenty of rooftops on which to put solar panels, and when they become cheap enough and aesthetically pleasing enough, they will probably become an increasingly important supplement to our country's huge appetite for electricity, especially because the sun shines during the peak use hours. And battery technology will help make all forms of renewable energy more useful, which brings me to my next principle. Research and development, not government mandates. It's hard to think of an important technological advance in our country that has not involved at least some government-sponsored research, especially in the area of energy. The most recent example is the development of unconventional gas that was enabled by 3D mapping invented at Sandia National Laboratory in New Mexico and the Department of Energy's large-scale demonstration project. There is an argument that by imposing government mandates, just as by imposing higher prices, government could force some innovation that could move us toward clean energy independence. But I believe the surer path would be to double the $5 billion we spend annually on non-defense, non-cleanup energy research and development at the Department of Energy, or the $4 billion more we spend at other government agencies, and trust the marketplace to produce better results. In 2005, the Rising Above the Gathering Storm report, written by a commission led by former Lockheed Martin CEO Norm Augustine, recommended doubling energy research and development. In 2007, Congress responded, passing the America Competes Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. Senator Coons and I are working together to reintroduce the America Competes Act for a third reauthorization, or second reauthorization after its original passage. One small agency that's the result of the America Competes Act is what we call ARPA-E, and it's already showing signs of the wisdom of this approach. ARPA-E has helped improve battery technology and work to produce liquid fuel from microbes, among other accomplishments. Seeing how our free enterprise can capitalize on this brings me to my fourth and last principle. Free market, not government picking winners and losers. We're more likely to have abundant supplies of cheap, clean, reliable energy in the United States if we trust the marketplace. The most appropriate role for government is in research. I believe a second role is limited jump-starting of new technologies. For example, unconventional gas, about which I just spoke, involved government research and a limited tax credit. The full tax credit for electric cars is limited. It's capped at 200,000 vehicles per manufacturer. To encourage innovation in nuclear energy, the government provided research and licensing support for small modular reactors, but that's limited to 5 years. Even for nuclear power plants, there is a production tax credit, but it's limited to 6,000 megawatts. On the other hand, President Reagan used to say that the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth is a government program. And that's too often the case with energy subsidies. The most glaring example of that is the more than 20-year-old subsidy for wind power, a technology that Energy Secretary Chu, the former secretary, a technology that he said had matured. Wind was supposed to help, this money, this jump start, was supposed to help jumpstart wind, but we've already lost $16 billion in federal revenue from 2009 through the end of 2012 alone, and Congress just added a one-year extension of the wind production tax credit costing $12 billion. Remember, the Department of Energy just spends $5 billion on energy research, and we're spending $12 billion in a one-year extension of the wind tax credit. The wind industry's idea of a phase-out would cost tens of billions more. People talk about big oil, but the big unnecessary subsidy is big wind, and a much better place to spend our money would be energy research. Mr. President, I've been fascinated with the progress we've made on the 7 grand challenges that I suggested 5 years ago. Perhaps by focusing on these 4 grand principles, the ones I've suggested in this speech, we can capitalize on the last 5 years of progress and move toward cheap, clean, reliable energy. Oak Ridge's evolution since the Manhattan Project days provides a good model. About 70 years ago, the astonishing collection of physicists that produced the 2 atomic bombs also enabled nuclear power, nuclear medicine, and other technological advances. What can we expect 5 years from now? To get a glimpse of the future, we might look at things that fit within the guiding principles that I've suggested today. For example, small modular reactors and virtual reactors that scientists at Oak Ridge are developing will revolutionize the safety and effectiveness of our nuclear technology. Game-changing manufacturing is also on the horizon with 3D printing. And DARPA-E, the small agency in the Department of Energy that came from America Competes, and other groups are increasing the reliability of our electricity supply. Mr. President, this United States of America is a remarkable place. And with the potential that I've described and the principles I've suggested, a competitive energy future is well within our grasp. I thank the President. I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.